In this video I will explain the rules of Kumite, the sparring discipline of the WNA, the World Nunchaku Association. In Kumite it is a 1 against 1 match where you have to fight with the Nunchaku, the WNA Safety Nunchaku, and the goal is to score points against your opponent. You can score either 1 point, a wazari, or 2 points, an ippon. So the match ends if somebody reaches 6 points, or at the end of the match, which usually stops at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So whoever has the most points at the end of the match will win. Good to know is that Kumite is a semi-contact art, so it is not allowed to go full contact against your opponent. So we must be cautious when using this weapon. So which materials do we use in the WNA Kumite discipline? First of all, we only use the WNA Safety Nunchakus. After a lot of years of research, this one has been developed over many years. So the core itself is quite durable, it bends a little bit, and it doesn't break upon contact with another player, which happens with a lot of other foam nunchakus in the market. The foam itself, it's still quite hard, so of course it's still a weapon, so it is a semi-contact sport. If you go around whacking people like that, they will definitely get injured. It is still a weapon. So safety measures have to be taken into account. So always use WNA Safety Nunchakus. Before each match, the referee will check if your nunchaku is safe still. Sometimes eventually pieces break off if you have used it many times, or the bit of the core is sticking out, which could lead to injuries. So always safety measures are taken into account. Once again, safety is very important in the Kumite discipline. Each participant has to wear a safety helmet. So, as you can see in this helmet, every part of the head is protected. The top of the head, the ears are protected, and at the front there's an iron screen, so the nunchaku would not be able to go through it and hit you in your eyes, for an example. That's very important. It has to be noted that the neck is not covered during the match, but it is not allowed to hit somebody in the neck. So be careful of that. Another safety measure is all men need to wear a groin guard under the trousers. For females, it is allowed to wear a chest protector, but it is not mandatory. Lastly, the belt. During kata and freestyle, a regular belt can be used, but during Kumite, always the official WNA belt is used, as you can see in this one. So, when you are using the helmet, and everybody is wearing the same uniform, so for the referee, it can be very hard to see who is who, because the screen is blocking the view for the referee. So one person is having his belt like this, with the yellow side to the outside, and the other one, well, that's the easy part of this belt, you can just flip it around. So now you have the black part visible. The other person will fight with the black side to the outside. So the referee will always have to say black point scores, yellow point scores. So through the belt it's easy to see who is who, and no names need to be mentioned. One of the most important rules in the Kumite discipline is that the nunchaku has to go from one hand to the other at least 2 times before you are allowed to attempt to score. So it is not allowed to just stand here, wait for your opponent, and then try to hit your opponent. So it has to go at least 2 times from one hand to the other. So for an example, I'm going to do the first upward strike, 1, 2, And from here, that was my second switch from hand to hand, I can attack my opponent. So it's very important that the nunchaku moves from one hand to the other. What you see a lot of times is the nunchaku is bouncing back and forth, but not actually switching from one hand to the other. So for an example, like this. So how many times did it switch from one hand to the other? The answer is 0. Because I kept holding it in my right hand and it never left my right hand. So I keep holding it in my right hand, but it's not actually leaving it. So you need to continue switching. So each time you see it is switching from one hand to the other. You also have the so-called fast switches, which doesn't really involve a technique, but it does switch from one hand to the other. And it is allowed. So for example, I do the first downward strike. So from the right hand, I catch it with my left hand. Now let go of my right hand. And I grab the same part again with my right hand. Then let go of my left hand. This actually counts as switching 2 times. So at this point, I'm allowed to attempt to hit my opponent. So at all times, it is mandatory to make at least 2 techniques that go from one hand to the other before you're allowed to attempt to attack your opponent. There's one exception, which is the block counter, but we'll get to that later in this video. Also, another important factor is time between the techniques and your attack. So it is not allowed to make 2 techniques. From here, wait, and then attack your opponent. So it has to be in one flow. The attack needs to be within 1 second after the last technique was formed. So 2 techniques. So a slight bit is allowed before you attack, but it's not meant to be 2 techniques. Wait, and then attack your opponent. So it needs to be in a good flow after your techniques. Another important aspect is the variation. The WNA system already knows over 80 different techniques that are used for examinations. And of course, there are plenty of other techniques that can be used with this weapon. Make sure that you use a lot of variation in your Kumite forms. It will also make it less predictable for your opponent where your attack is coming from. Otherwise, if you constantly use the same technique, it's much easier to predict your style. A few times during the match, it is allowed for the referee to check with the assistant referees if you have enough variation. If you don't have enough variation, you will get a chewy or a formal warning or even a higher warning if you already had a chewy before that. So make sure that you have plenty of variation, because it can actually let you lose the match if you don't use the variation. So for the variation, all sorts of nunchaku techniques can be used. Make sure it moves from one hand to the other. So nice freestyle moves, but aerials are not advised. First of all, you let go of the nunchaku so it doesn't count as one switch to the other, and it's very risky of it dropping the floor. So try to make some techniques that are functional and more suitable for a Kumite style instead of freestyle. So you can use all sorts of techniques, upward, downward, sideward, all different sides of techniques, as long as it goes from one side to the other. For an example, blocks do not count as a technique because it doesn't switch from one side to the other. So just make sure you're constantly moving around, switching the nunchaku from one hand to the other. So we've already gone through the rules of the 2 switches from one end to the other and the 5 variation. But how are you allowed to attack? First of all, you're not allowed to attack with the same part that you're holding. So this is not a score. So you have to score with the other part of the nunchaku. You are allowed to hit any part of the body except for the neck and for the groin. So for men, it's always mandatory to wear a groin guard, and a helmet is mandatory for everybody. So it is not allowed to hit the opponent in the neck. Sometimes it can happen on accident, but if you see that somebody intentionally strikes towards the neck a couple of times, then it can really be a measure for disqualification even. So once again, it is a semi-contact art. And these are safety nunchakus, but they can still really injure somebody. So you're not allowed to just roughly swing without control towards your opponent. So if somebody does that and strikes through their opponent, they will get a warning or a penalty depending on the severity of the action. So if I aim towards the ribs, for example, a strike would be like this. You see, my arm is pretty much pointing towards where I'm going to hit, and it will stop there. So it won't continue like that, causing a lot of damage. So you try to hit that part, you stop there. I try to hit head, I stop there. Try to hit that, I don't go like that. So really control your nunchaku and know when to stop. So you're allowed to hit everywhere. So the legs, the body, the hand. So from the side of the hand, or the top of the hand, the rib, and the legs. It doesn't have to be hard as long as it is controlled. So even if you go slow and your opponent doesn't block for some reason, it is a score. So make sure that you do block if you're getting a slow hit, otherwise it will be a point. So even things like that, they're not hard hits, but they're controlled, they're effective, and they're well on target. So they will be given a point. So take that into account. That's a block counter. So when somebody attacks, you make a good block. You don't need to switch 2 times from hand to hand before you're allowed to attack. So you perform a good block, you can immediately attack the opponent and you will get an ippon if you score correctly. When somebody loses the weapon, the other person will get an ippon. So if I disarm the opponent, I will get an ippon. Otherwise, it's also when you're turning with the nunchaku and you drop your nunchaku, then the other person gets an ippon. That is an Aiuchi, which means that both participants score at the same time. In that case, no score will be given to both participants. At the beginning of a Kumite match, the head referee will say to the participants ready, to make sure they are ready to start the match. He will say, nunchakus open in front. And he will say, rei, which means bow in Japanese. Then he will say, hajime, and that is the start of the match. And then the fighting will commence. During each match, there will be 1 head referee and 2 assistant referees. one assistant referee will carefully watch the person holding the black-sided belt, and the other assistant referee will carefully watch the person holding the yellow-sided belt. They will count the variations, they will count if there's two switches from one hand to the other before attacking, things like that. So a very important job. So during the match, the head referee will occasionally say "Yame," which means stop. It can happen after a score or an Aiuchi, or if something happens that the referee deems worthy of stopping the match. The Nunchaku Kumite system is a point stop system, so if somebody scores, the referee will always say "Yame." At that point, it's very important to stop using your nunchaku, go back to your position, and have the nunchaku open in front and wait for the signal of the referee to start over again. Penalties. There are many forms of penalties that can be given during a Kumite match. The order for penalties is an unofficial warning, which is merely a suggestion. An official warning, which can lead to a win in the case of a hantai, when the judges need to make a general decision if it's a tie. They have a chui, which really will give an advantage to the person in case there is a tie. Then keikoku 1, which will also give a lazari 1 point to the other player. Keikoku 2 will also give an ippon 2 points to the other player. And lastly, hansokumake, which means disqualification of the person. So there are many actions that can lead to a penalty. There are two common ones that don't really have bad intention. One is not a non-variation, so you continue to only use 2 or 4 techniques and not a minimum of 5. So the assistant referee will say, no, not a variation, and you can get a penalty for that. The other one is stepping outside of the competition area. Usually the competition area is 8 by 8 meters, sometimes 10 by 10 if there is a big competition being held. If you step outside of it, you will get a penalty because it's pretty much fleeing the area where the competition is being held. So those two don't really have any bad intention here. But there are other ones. Firstly, it is not allowed to talk as a participant during the competition. So, for example, you get a hit against you, you're disappointed, you're not allowed to curse, use foul language, even say things against your opponent. That can actually lead to a disqualification. So keep that in mind. Bad sportsmanship in general. So also, if people can see that you're really angry, aggravated, and that you intentionally want to injure your opponent, also definitely a penalty. Other things that can happen is, in general, that you hit too hard or too uncontrolled. So, as I said earlier, if you have a target, you stop at the point that you want to hit at. You don't go striking through your opponent, because that can actually lead to a pretty bad injury. So that will also definitely lead to a penalty. So keep these rules in mind when doing Kumite. So you've reached the end of a Kumite match. Either one person has 6 points, well, then he or she is the winner, or the 2 minutes and 30 seconds have passed. So the referee will then assign a winner if there is not a tie. If there is a tie, it depends on the type of competition, what is being done. Well, if it's a regular competition, it's just a pool of many people playing against each other, then it will just be noted and the next match will be done. But if it's the finals of a big competition, then you really need a winner. So usually the match is then prolonged with 1 minute. If it's still a tie at that point, they usually go to either a hantai, which means that the judges will then form a conclusion based on which they will find is the winner. Maybe more participation, more tags, good blocks, things like that. And another solution is the golden score, which means no time limit, just a person that will score the first time, that will be the winner. So those are the variables when you reach the end of the match. In this video I've tried my best to show the different rules in the WNA Kumite discipline, but it is a very complicated system, I do know this. So you can also find the regulations on our website, so make sure you read them carefully and check with us if you have any questions. We'll be happy to answer them. So good luck. If you like the style, if you want to become a member, join us on our website. If you want to take Nunchaku-do classes, send me a message and we'll hit you up. So hope you have a great day.